You have his eyes, you know." The observation was casual, thrown out by Victor Crane the way someone might comment on the weather. But for Dominic Patterson, it landed like a live grenade. He stood frozen in the executive break room, the coffee pot hovering mid-pour over his mug. His heartbeat kicked into overdrive. "I'm sorry," he managed. Victor, co-founder of Sterling Apex Technologies and Lucas Cardone's oldest business partner, glanced between Dominic and the man seated across the glass-walled conference room. The CEO was buried in a spreadsheet, oblivious to the moment unraveling 30 feet away. "You and Lucas," Victor said, tilting his head. "Same eyes. Same way of holding yourselves. It's honestly a little eerie." Dominic set down the coffee pot with extreme care. 3 weeks. He had spent 3 weeks inside this building, working alongside the billionaire who had no idea he was his father. Every shared instinct, every moment of unexpected laughter, every time Lucas had said, "I was thinking exactly that," it had all been building toward this. Toward someone finally noticing. "Just coincidence," Dominic said, smiling like his chest wasn't caving in. That night he called his mother, and laughed. Actually laughed. "Mom, you will not believe what happened today. Mr. Crane thinks I look like Lucas Cardone. Isn't that wild?" The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. "Dominic." Christina Patterson's voice came out barely above a whisper, and it trembled in a way he had never heard before. Not when the rent was short. Not when his appendix burst at 14. Not once in 22 years. "We need to talk. Not over the phone. Please come home." And just like that, the world he had always known cracked straight down the middle. 3 weeks earlier, Christina had been sitting at her kitchen table in her Portland apartment, watching the morning light turn her untouched coffee cold. The email had arrived at 6:47 a.m. "Congratulations, Dominic Patterson, Sterling Apex Technologies Executive Fellows Program." Her fingers had gone numb scrolling through the details. 6 candidates selected from thousands of applicants nationwide. Direct mentorship with the CEO. Rotational access to every division of one of America's most powerful tech conglomerates. The signature at the bottom, Lucas Cardone, Chief Executive Officer. 23 years. She had maintained 23 years of careful, deliberate distance. And now her son, their son, was about to walk directly into the orbit of the man who had never known he existed. "Mom." Dominic appeared in the kitchen doorway, tall and loose-limbed, still in his sleep clothes. At 22, the resemblance was undeniable if you knew where to look. The same gray-green eyes, sharp and watchful. The same habit of tilting his chin slightly when he was working through a problem. "You okay? You look like you just read your own obituary." "I'm fine." She forced a smile and stood, pulling him into a hug that lasted slightly too long. "I'm just so proud of you, baby. Sterling Apex. That's everything you worked for. Only 6 spots in the country," he said against her shoulder. "And the acceptance letter says I'll basically be functioning as Cardone's personal assistant for the first 3 months. Can you believe it, Mom?" He pulled back, studying her face. "What's wrong?" "Nothing." She let him go. "Absolutely nothing. This is the best news I've ever heard." Over his shoulder, their reflection blinked back at her from the dark window. Mother and son, the family they had always been, just the two of them against everything. She had protected that. She had protected him. The question gnawing at her ribs was whether the protection had an expiration date she had just missed. To understand how Christina Patterson ended up in this impossible position, you have to go back to where the story actually begins. Not with the email, and not with the secret, but with a woman who was once brilliantly, recklessly in love. She had met Lucas Cardone during her final semester at Georgetown's business school, when he was 26 years old and already dismantling assumptions about what a startup could become. Their first real conversation lasted 4 hours. She missed dinner. She didn't care. "You think about risk differently than anyone I've ever met," he had told her, leaning across a coffee shop table like she was the most interesting thing in the room. "You build in the contingency before you've even committed to the plan." She had laughed. "My grandmother called it expecting the worst and still showing up anyway." He had looked at her like that was the most beautiful philosophy he'd ever encountered. They were inseparable within 6 months. Married within 2 years. And for a season, a bright, burning season she still sometimes let herself remember, they had been genuine partners. She handled the financial architecture of Sterling Apex as it scaled from a scrappy startup to a mid-sized powerhouse. He brought the vision. She made it survivable. "You're the reason this company is still standing," Lucas told her once, after she had restructured their Series B to survive a market correction that had killed 3 competitors. She had believed him. Then the company grew beyond what either of them had imagined. And as Sterling Apex expanded, so did the space between them, and who counted inside it. It happened gradually, the way most erosions do. The board meetings where her financial recommendations were forwarded to Whitmore for review. The investor dinners where she was seated at the far end of the table, introduced as Lucas's wife rather than his CFO. The morning she arrived at the office to find her access codes had been quietly transferred without discussion. "The board feels more comfortable with dedicated role separation," Lucas explained, his voice genuinely puzzled by her reaction. "This is a good thing, Chris. It frees you up." "For what?" she had asked. He had gestured vaguely at their penthouse and the city beyond it. "For all of this. We can start building our family now. You've been saying you want that. I want to be a mother and a CFO. Other people manage it. You'll be so much happier when you're not stretched thin between both." He said it like it was settled. Like he had already decided on her behalf what happiness looked like. She had stopped arguing that night. But she had not forgotten. The breaking point came at a gala for Sterling Apex's 6th anniversary. Christina overheard a journalist asking Lucas about the company's early financial strategy, the restructuring that had saved them. "Christina has always been my strongest support system," Lucas said smoothly. "She manages our personal life beautifully, which lets me focus on the work." Quick pause. Leave your name in the comments if you'd like me to use it in the next story or give you a shout out. Please be sure to like, share, and subscribe as this encourages me to create more interesting episodes like this. Now, let's dive right into the rest of the story. She stood in the corridor outside the ballroom, holding a champagne glass she didn't drink from, and understood clearly, he hadn't lied. He had simply replaced the truth with a version that fit his narrative. And he believed it. 2 weeks later, she found out she was pregnant. By then, she had already made her decision. The pregnancy only sharpened it. She would not raise a child in the orbit of a man who could look straight at her and not see her. She would not watch her child slowly shaped into whatever Lucas Cardone decided was the correct version of a person. She took what the prenup entitled her to, changed her last name back to Patterson, and moved to Portland. She built her consulting practice from a studio apartment, sometimes working past midnight after Dominic fell asleep. And she told her son a careful, incomplete truth. His father had been a driven man who existed in a world incompatible with raising children. That the relationship had ended before either of them knew about the pregnancy. That it wasn't abandonment, it was architecture. She had designed a life where Dominic could become his own person. She had never told him the man's name. Until now, that had felt like protection. Now, watching Dominic pull on his jacket on his first morning at Sterling Apex, she was no longer sure what it felt like. Dominic arrived at Sterling Apex Technologies on a Monday morning wearing the suit he had bought specifically for this moment. Charcoal gray, slim cut, a white shirt that his mother had ironed at 5:30 a.m. while pretending not to be emotional about it. The company's Seattle headquarters occupied 40 floors of a glass tower that caught the sound on clear days and disappeared into cloud on gray ones. Today it disappeared. The orientation session was led by a sharp-eyed woman named Billionaire, the Fellows Program Coordinator, who moved through HR paperwork and security protocols with the efficiency of someone who had done this 70 times. There were 5 other new fellows. Dominic was the only one who had been assigned directly to the CEO's rotation rather than a division head. Mr. Cardone personally selects 1 fellow per cycle, Priya explained as they passed the executive floor. Consider yourself very lucky, Patterson. The word lucky had never felt so complicated. He saw Lucas Cardone for the first time at a distance. Tall, broad-shouldered, in a perfectly cut navy suit, dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. He was speaking to 2 board members near the elevator bank, unhurried, the conversation clearly on his schedule. He glanced up as the orientation group passed. For half a second, his gray-green eyes landed on Dominic. Something passed through them, not recognition, not yet, but the particular alertness of a man who noticed details others didn't. Then he turned back to his conversation. Dominic kept walking. His pulse did not behave itself for the next several minutes. That evening, he called his mother. I saw him today. At a distance. He didn't know who I was. A pause. Mom. You okay? I'm fine. Her voice was too smooth. Too deliberate. Just be yourself tomorrow. Promise me. You keep saying that like it means something specific. What aren't you telling me? Nothing. I'm proud of you. Get some sleep. He didn't sleep much. But he arrived at 6:43 a.m. the next morning, 17 minutes before his scheduled start, which meant he was still 9 minutes behind Lucas Cardone. The CEO was already at his standing desk, annotating a document with a red pen, when Dominic knocked on the open glass door. Mr. Patterson. Lucas didn't look up immediately. Coffee's on the side table. Black for me. Dominic poured it, noting with a small jolt that he had already been pouring himself the same. Black, no sugar. He set the mug on the coaster beside Lucas's desk without being asked where to put it. Lucas looked up then. Something flicked across his expression, not quite curiosity, not quite familiarity. He filed it away and gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Tell me why you chose Sterling Apex. Honest answer, not your application answer. Dominic had rehearsed the diplomatic version. Instead he said, because this company has always argued that technology should serve human dignity, not just human convenience. I wanted to be somewhere that meant that seriously. Lucas was quiet for a moment. Most candidates lead with market cap. Results aren't the same thing as purpose. A ghost of a smile. No. They're not. He leaned back. Let's see if you still believe that in 6 months. We start with quarterly projections this morning. I want your read on the Pacific Northwest expansion proposal before lunch. By the end of the first week, Dominic had begun to understand that working alongside Lucas Cardone was like working alongside an accelerated version of himself. The same analytical instincts, the same impatience with explanations that buried the conclusion, the same way of going completely still when a problem genuinely interested him. It should have felt strange. It felt like recognizing a language he had always spoken without knowing where he'd learned it. He noticed the small things. They both unconsciously aligned objects on desks to right angles. They both reached for the same corner of a document when reading it. They both drummed the same 3-finger rhythm when waiting for a presentation to load. He cataloged these things the way a person catalogs symptoms, not yet sure whether the diagnosis would be wonderful or devastating. It was Victor Crane who said it out loud. 3 weeks in, on a Tuesday afternoon in the executive dining room, that quiet, wood-paneled space reserved for senior leadership and their guests, Victor had wandered in while Dominic was refreshing the coffee service before Lucas's afternoon strategy session. Victor was 61, silver-haired, with the easy confidence of a man who had built something real and knew it. He and Lucas had co-founded Sterling Apex together. He had been at every turning point of the company's history. He poured himself a coffee, glanced at Dominic, and said, "You have his eyes, you know." Dominic went very still. "Same eyes. Same way of holding yourself." Victor tilted his head, studying the distance between Dominic and the CEO across the room. "It's honestly a little uncanny." "Just coincidence," Dominic said. His voice came out steady. He was proud of that. Victor made a non-committal sound and moved on. The conversation lasted 11 seconds. It lived in Dominic's chest for the rest of the day. He called his mother that evening with a story still half-wrapped in humor, because he hadn't yet understood what the silence would sound like. "Mom, you won't believe this. Victor Crane told me I have Lucas Cardone's eyes." "Isn't that, Mom, nothing?" The line didn't go dead. That would have been easier. Instead, there was the specific quality of a silence that meant someone was trying very hard to decide what to say. "Dominic." Her voice came out fractured. "Come home. Tonight. Please." He was there in 40 minutes. He had driven the whole way with the radio off, something pressing hard against the center of his sternum. She was waiting at the kitchen table. No coffee this time. Just her hands folded in front of her, and the expression of a woman who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was about to set it down. "Just tell me," he said before he even sat. She told him. It came out in order, which surprised him somehow, not fragmented or defensive, but chronological. How she had met Lucas in business school. How they had built something extraordinary together. How success had changed what he wanted from her, or maybe had simply revealed what he had always wanted. Not a partner, but an accessory shaped like one. How she had stood in a corridor outside a charity gala and understood, finally, clearly, that she was disappearing inside his version of their life. How she had found out she was pregnant 2 weeks after deciding to leave. "I had already made the decision," she said quietly. "The baby didn't change it. It only made it more urgent." Dominic sat very still through all of it. When she finished, the kitchen was so quiet he could hear the refrigerator hum. "His name is Lucas Cardone," he said. "Not a question. A reconfiguration. Yes. The man I have been working with for 3 weeks. Yes." He stood up. Sat back down. Stood up again. "You were going to tell me. Before I started. And then you didn't. You were so proud," she whispered. "You earned that position on your own merit. I couldn't take that from you. Not the moment it arrived. I was going to tell you that night, and then you walked in so happy and I—" "You were scared." She looked up. "Yes. Did you ever think he might have changed?" She was quiet for a long beat. "I couldn't take that risk with your life, Dominic. Not based on the man I knew." He moved toward the door, then stopped. "Did you love him?" Her eyes filled. "With everything I had. That's why it broke the way it did." She steadied herself. "The man I fell in love with was brilliant and principled and saw me fully. That's the version of him that I see in you, the best parts of him, without what ambition did to the rest." He nodded once and left. He drove back to Seattle in the dark, replaying 3 weeks of interactions through an entirely different lens. And by the time he reached his apartment, he had made a decision. He wasn't going to run. He wasn't going to reveal himself yet either. He was going to stay and watch. He was going to learn who Lucas Cardone actually was, now, in the present, before deciding whether the man deserved to know the truth. He came back the next morning at 6:44 a.m. Lucas was already at his desk. He looked up when Dominic knocked, something flickering briefly across his face, relief almost, and then the habitual neutrality returned. "You're early again," Lucas said. "Easier to think when the floor is quiet." Lucas made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Exactly." He tilted his head toward the agenda on the screen. "Board presentation is Thursday. I need the Pacific Northwest numbers rebuilt from the source data. Whitmore's version buried every risk assumption. Find them." Dominic found them. All 7. Over the following days, he watched Lucas with the careful attention of someone assembling a complete picture rather than just a useful one. He watched how Lucas ran meetings, not by dominating them, but by creating enough silence that other people filled it with their actual thinking. He watched him credit the facilities manager by name in a board memo for an operational insight. He watched him push back on a senior VP's acquisition strategy in front of the full executive committee, firmly and without apology, but in a way that left the VP's dignity intact. This was not the man his mother had described. Or, more precisely, it was the man his mother had described at the beginning, before the company became everything and everyone else became backdrop. The moment that stayed with Dominic longest happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. The board meeting had run long, the room had cleared, and Lucas was standing at the window with his jacket off, looking out at the gray Sound. He didn't seem to realize Dominic had come back to collect his laptop. "My ex-wife used to say that the city looks most honest in the rain," Lucas said, without turning. "Everything pretending less." Dominic went still. "She was the most perceptive person I've ever known." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "I'm not sure why I'm telling you this. Something about you makes it easy to think out loud." He finally turned. "Anyway, pack up. You've earned an early evening." That night, Dominic called his mother. "He talked about you today," he said. He didn't know that's who he was talking about. But he described you. She was quiet for a long time. What did he say? That you were the most perceptive person he'd ever known. A pause. He also said losing you was something he caused. He didn't hedge it. Another silence. "Dominic, don't romanticize him based on 2 good weeks." "I'm not romanticizing him. I'm watching him. There's a difference." He exhaled. "He's changed, Mom. Not in a performed way. The whole company culture is different from what you described. He takes feedback. He credits people publicly. He sat with the junior engineers for 40 minutes last week after a product setback, not to manage their morale, genuinely to listen. People often regret what they've lost without changing the behavior that lost it." "I know. That's why I'm still watching." He paused. "But I wanted you to know what I'm seeing." She said his name once, softly, and then said good night. He lay on his back in the dark, staring at the ceiling, thinking about a man who had spent 23 years building an empire, and apparently spent at least some of that time wondering where a woman had gone who could read the honesty in rain. He was 2 weeks from a decision he couldn't unmake. He just didn't know which direction it would fall yet. The decision got made for him on a Wednesday. Victor Crane knocked on the executive suite door at 2:17 p.m. and asked Lucas if they could have a private word. Lucas sent Dominic on an early lunch without elaboration. Dominic went to the building's ground floor cafe. He ordered nothing. He sat at a corner table for 22 minutes, and when he returned upstairs and passed the glass-walled corridor, he could see through it. Lucas was standing with both hands on the edge of his desk, not sitting, not moving. Victor was speaking. Lucas's face had gone the particular gray of a man absorbing something that was restructuring everything. Dominic kept walking. He was at his desk for approximately 6 minutes before his phone rang. Christina Patterson. He declined the call. It wasn't the right moment. Inside the executive suite, Lucas had heard the following. Victor had done the math. 23 years since Rachel, since Christina, had left. The kid was 22. The eyes, the mannerisms, the uncanny thinking patterns. The mother who had taught him financial strategy from a young age. The father's name not listed on his birth certificate. The dates that aligned with surgical precision. "I'd stake my stake in this company on it," Victor said. "He's yours, Lucas." Lucas pulled up the employee file. He scrolled to the birth certificate, scanned into the background check documents. Father, not listed. Date of birth, 8 months after Christina had vanished from his life completely. He sat back. He had spent the better part of a year after she left trying to find her. Disconnected number, forwarded mail returned unopened, mutual contacts who had all gone quiet. He had told himself she needed space. He had told himself she'd reach out when she was ready. Then he'd buried himself in the company, and eventually he'd stopped expecting the call. He had never considered this. Not once. "What are you going to do?" Victor asked. "I need to talk to her," Lucas said. His voice came out low and very controlled. "I need to hear this from Christina." That evening, he drove to Portland alone. No assistant, no driver. He found the address. It hadn't required much, given the resources available to him, and he felt a particular complicated guilt about that. Christina opened the door. She looked exactly as he remembered, and entirely different, and he understood immediately from the expression on her face that she had known this moment was coming. She had known it the minute Dominic got the acceptance letter. "Were you ever going to tell me?" he asked. "Or was I just never supposed to know?" She stepped back and let him in. "How long have you known?" she asked. Victor noticed the resemblance. "I looked at his birth certificate." He moved into the living room, and the photographs on the walls stopped him. Dominic at every age. A whole life documented in frames, and he had been absent from every one of them. 23 years, Christina. "I did what I thought was right." "You made that decision alone." "He's my son too." "You were erasing me." The words came out with the velocity of something that had been held in too long. "Decision by decision, meeting by meeting, you were turning me from your partner into your backdrop. I was not going to raise a child watching that happen to him too." He flinched. "I never," he started. "You never meant to. I know that. It happened anyway." He moved to the window. The city lights below blurred slightly. He stood there for a long moment before he spoke again. "Does he know?" "He found out 2 weeks ago. Victor made a comment and Dominic called me laughing about it. I couldn't lie once he asked me directly." 2 weeks. The number landed differently than he expected. "He's known for 2 weeks and kept coming into that office every morning." "He wanted to know who you are now," Christina said quietly, "before deciding whether you deserve to know about him." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Lucas had ever heard. He was still processing it when the front door opened and Dominic walked in. Dominic stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the scene. "I guess we're doing this now," he said, and stepped inside. The three of them formed a loose triangle in the small living room. His mother near the bookshelf, Lucas by the window, and Dominic standing between them with his jacket over one arm, like a man who had come home from work to find the past waiting in his living room, which was exactly what had happened. "How did you find out?" Dominic asked Lucas. Victor noticed the resemblance. "Then I looked at your birth certificate." Lucas's voice was measured, controlled, but his eyes were doing something entirely different, moving across Dominic's face with the careful hunger of a man trying to see everything he had missed. The dates aligned. Dominic nodded slowly. I found out 2 weeks ago. I know. Lucas paused. Your mother just told me that you wanted to assess the situation before deciding what to do. I needed to know if the person she described still existed, Dominic said, or if you had become someone else. Lucas absorbed that. And Dominic looked at him for a long moment. The man she left was someone who couldn't see past his own vision of how things should be. The man I've been working with for a month listens before he decides. Credits the work he didn't do. Creates space for people instead of filling it. He paused. You're not the same person. I don't think you're performing that, either. I've watched you when you don't know anyone's paying attention. Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a brief, unguarded crack in the composure. I'm not performing it, he said quietly. I lost the best thing that had ever happened to me, and it took me years to understand that I was the reason. That is not the kind of lesson you forget. He turned to Christina. I'm sorry for what I built and what I let it cost you. You deserved a partner, and I gave you a supporting role in my own story. That was wrong. It wasn't what I meant for us, but it's what I did, and I should have said that a long time ago. Christina sat down slowly on the arm of the sofa. She had been holding that apology at arm's length for 23 years. Now that it had arrived, direct, unqualified, without deflection, she didn't know what to do with it except let it land. Where do we go from here? Dominic asked. The practical question cutting through the weight of the room. That depends entirely on what you want, Lucas said. I've lost 22 years of your life. I would like the chance to know you, as my son, not as a trainee. But I will not pressure you, and I will not use my position to make you feel like you owe me anything. The program you earned. This is separate from that. Dominic considered this. I think I'd like that, he said finally. But there are practical complications. We'll transfer your mentorship to Priya. Lucas said immediately. You continue the program exactly as intended. No preferential treatment and no compromise to your professional standing. I have no interest in making this about what's convenient for me. Christina looked at the man standing in her living room and found herself doing a calculation she hadn't expected. The man in front of her was not the one she had fled. That one would have immediately tried to assert terms. This one was negotiating with his own child over what the child wanted. She exhaled for the first time in what felt like several weeks. I think we all need time, she said. This is a great deal for everyone to carry at once. Lucas nodded. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, he said, and looked at Dominic. Working with you these past weeks has been some of the most genuinely rewarding time I've had in years. Not because of this. He gestured at the space between them. I didn't know. But because of who you are. The quality of your thinking, the integrity of your instincts. The man you've become. His gaze moved to Christina. You did that. Whatever else happened between us, you did that. Then he left. Mother and son sat in the quiet for a while. Are you okay? Christina asked. I don't know yet. He looked at her. Are you? She thought about it honestly. I think I might be, eventually. Hearing him say it, acknowledge what he did without making excuses for it, I didn't know I still needed that until it happened. She reached for his hand. He let her take it. The weeks that followed moved at the pace of new and careful things. Dominic's mentorship was quietly transferred to Billionaire, who turned out to be exceptional in her own right, rigorous and direct, with a talent for systems thinking that complemented Dominic's instinct for strategy. His standing in the Fellows program didn't slip. If anything, The removal of the particular pressure of working under his father's daily scrutiny allowed him to perform more freely. He and Lucas began meeting outside the office. Not often, and not dramatically. A dinner on a Thursday, a Saturday morning walk along the waterfront where Lucas talked about the company's early years with a candor he apparently reserved for non-business contexts. They discovered shared interests that had nothing to do with quarterly projections. Obscure documentary films, an almost identical approach to cooking that prioritized speed over technique, an irrational attachment to physical books in an era that had mostly abandoned them. "My mother has the same habit," Dominic said once, gesturing at the shelf in Lucas's home office that was 3 deep in paperbacks. Lucas had smiled in the particular way of a man realizing something about himself he hadn't noticed before. Christina kept her distance from these early exchanges, which was the right instinct. Dominic needed space to build something with his father without her history with Lucas operating as subtext in every room. But eventually, Lucas called her. "I'm not asking for anything," he said when she answered. "I just think, after everything, we should be able to talk. About Dominic, about what we missed, about what co-parenting looks like when the child is already an adult. If you're willing." The first conversation was awkward and occasionally painful and also, unexpectedly, something close to relief. Lucas spoke about the years after she left, not to assign blame, but because he needed her to understand that he had not simply moved on unchanged. That her departure had been a rupture that forced him to examine things he had been successfully avoiding. That the company culture she would find now was not the one she had left. She told him about the years she had spent raising Dominic alone. The 2 a.m. fevers. The first-grade teacher who had flagged Dominic's reading comprehension as advanced and the Saturday tutoring sessions that had followed. The college application essay Dominic had written about financial systems and equity, which had made her cry at the kitchen table. Lucas listened to all of it without interrupting. She noticed that 6 months after the truth had reorganized all 3 of their lives, they sat together for the first time at Christina's kitchen table. The same table where she had read that email, where Dominic had grown up doing homework, where she had told the truth that changed everything. "I have something to tell you both," Dominic said, setting down his fork. The board approved a new division at Sterling Apex. Social impact technology, applied research addressing healthcare access gaps, climate resilience infrastructure, educational platform equity. "I've been offered to lead it." Christina felt the particular fullness of a parent watching the outline of everything they had hoped for their child resolve into something real. "That's extraordinary," she said. "It's perfect for you." Lucas nodded. The proposal was unanimously approved. "I recused myself from the vote." He paused. "But I read every page of it. Twice. It was visionary and practical in equal measure. You have your mother's ability to make strategy feel inevitable." He looked at Dominic steadily. "I'm proud of you. In whatever capacity I've earned the right to say that." Dominic looked between them, the woman who had raised him and the man who had shaped half of his instincts without either of them knowing it, and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for 6 months. "She told me once," he said, "that the hardest choices are often the ones that save us. I think that's true. But I also think sometimes we get the chance to build something new from what was broken, if everyone involved is willing to try." Christina reached across the table. She took Lucas's hand in one of hers and Dominic's in the other. After a moment, Lucas extended his free hand to Dominic, completing the circle. 3 people connected by blood, by old choices and new ones, by secrets finally spoken and truths that had taken 23 years to find the right room. Not a conventional family, a real one. Complicated, still healing, and finally, honestly, theirs. Hey lovers and billionaires, if you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends and family. Your support truly means a lot and helps our stories reach more hearts around the world. See you on the next one.